It was a bright afternoon in downtown Chicago, the kind of day where the city hummed with life. On the bustling sidewalk outside a glossy office tower, a well-dressed man stepped out, adjusting his tie. People passing by whispered as they recognized him, Ethan Turner, one of the richest men in America. At just 45, Ethan was the CEO of Apex Tech, a multi-billion-dollar company that dominated the tech industry. His face was plastered across magazine covers, and his life seemed perfect. But on this particular day, something extraordinary was about to happen, something that even Ethan's fortune couldn't have prepared him for. As he walked towards his car, he spotted a boy no older than 10, sitting on the curb, clutching a tattered backpack. The boy's dark skin glistened under the sun, and his eyes darted nervously as if he didn't belong. Ethan wouldn't have given him a second glance, but something about the boy's face caught his attention, a certain familiarity that made him stop in his tracks. Before Ethan could speak, the boy looked up, scowling. "What are you staring at, old man?" His tone was defiant, his voice carrying a mix of anger and fear. Ethan hesitated, unsure why he felt a sudden jolt in his chest. "Where's your family, kid?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "I don't have one," the boy snapped, standing up and slinging his backpack over one shoulder. "What's it to you?" Ethan didn't know what made him press further. "Why aren't you in school?" The boy smirked, as if the question was a joke. "School's a waste of time," he said, walking away. For reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan followed. "Wait," he called after the boy. "What's your name?" The boy stopped, turned slowly, and stared at him for a long moment. "Jordan," he said finally, his voice quieter. Ethan froze. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. His mind raced back to a part of his life he had buried, an affair from years ago, a woman named Maria. They had parted ways abruptly, and she had vanished without a trace. She had been pregnant when they last spoke. Ethan's world spun as realization dawned on him. Could it be? Was this boy, this street-smart kid who didn't know him, his son? "Jordan," Ethan repeated, his voice barely audible. "Who's your mother?" The boy's face darkened. "Why do you care?" He shot back before turning and running down the street, disappearing into the crowd. Ethan stood rooted to the spot, his heart pounding. He had to know the truth. The day had started like any other for Jordan. He woke up in the tiny one-bedroom apartment he shared with his Aunt Kay, who barely noticed him as she left early for her cleaning job. Jordan was supposed to be in school, but he hadn't been in weeks. He hated it there. The teachers looked at him like he was a problem, and the other kids never understood what it was like to hustle just to survive. Instead, Jordan spent his days wandering the streets, hanging around the basketball court, or sitting outside fancy office buildings, watching people in suits who didn't have to worry about their next meal. He liked to imagine what it would be like to live their lives, to have more than just enough. But today was different. He'd been sitting on that curb longer than usual when he noticed the man in the expensive suit staring at him. Jordan wasn't sure why, but something about the man's gaze unsettled him. It wasn't the usual look of pity or annoyance he got from adults. This man looked like he knew him, and that made Jordan nervous. When the man approached and started asking questions, Jordan felt a mix of anger and fear. He didn't like people prying into his life, especially not rich men who couldn't possibly understand what it was like to be him. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to that man than met the eye. Later that evening, Ethan sat alone in his penthouse apartment, staring at a photo of Maria on his phone. It was an old picture, taken during a weekend getaway to New Orleans. She had been laughing, her hand resting on her belly. He had tried to find her after they broke up, but she had made it clear she didn't want him in her life. Over the years, Ethan convinced himself it was for the best. He threw himself into his work, building his empire. But now the possibility that Jordan could be his son consumed him. Ethan picked up his phone and made a call. "Find Maria Reyes," he told his private investigator. "I don't care how much it costs. I need answers." As he hung up, Ethan felt a mix of dread and anticipation. If Jordan was his son, how would he ever make up for the years they had lost? The next morning, Jordan was back at his usual spot, but this time he wasn't alone. A group of older kids stood around him, laughing and joking. One of them, a tall boy named Malik, handed Jordan a wad of cash. "Good job, little man," Malik said, patting Jordan on the back. "Keep running those errands, and you'll be rolling in no time." Jordan pocketed the money, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in his stomach. He knew Malik and his crew weren't the kind of people Aunt Kay would approve of, but they gave him a way to make money. And money meant independence. As the group dispersed, Jordan felt someone watching him. He turned and saw the same man from yesterday standing across the street. "What's his deal?" Malik asked, following Jordan's gaze. "Just some nosy guy," Jordan muttered. Malik smirked. "Want me to handle him?" Jordan shook his head. "Nah, I got this." He walked over to Ethan, his hands clenched into fists. "Why are you following me?" he demanded. Ethan looked at him calmly. "I need to talk to you," he said. "It's important." "I don't care," Jordan said, his voice rising. "Leave me alone." But Ethan didn't back down. "Please," he said, "just give me 5 minutes." Jordan hesitated, then sighed. "Fine," he said. 5 minutes." They walked to a nearby park and sat on a bench. Ethan took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "I think you might be my son," he said finally. Jordan stared at him, his expression unreadable. Then he burst out laughing. "You're crazy," he said. "I don't have a dad." "I know your mother," Ethan said quietly. "Maria Reyes. Does that name mean anything to you?" Jordan's laughter died in his throat. He stared at Ethan, his eyes wide with shock. "How do you know my mom?" he whispered. Ethan's heart ached as he saw the fear and confusion on Jordan's face. "I was with her a long time ago," he said, "before you were born." Jordan stood up abruptly, his hands trembling. "You're lying," he said. "My mom never talked about you." "I'm not lying," Ethan said, standing as well. "I can prove it." Jordan shook his head, backing away. "Stay away from me," he said, before turning and running as fast as he could. Ethan watched him go, his heart heavy with a mix of regret and determination. He knew he couldn't let Jordan slip away again. That night, Jordan sat on his bed, clutching an old photo of his mother. She had died when he was just a baby, and Aunt Kay had raised him ever since. He had always wondered about his father, but Aunt Kay never talked about him. Now the man who claimed to be his father had appeared out of nowhere, and Jordan didn't know what to believe. Part of him wanted to trust Ethan, but another part of him was afraid of getting hurt. As he stared at the photo, a knock on the door jolted him from his thoughts. "Jordan," Aunt Kay's voice called from the other side. "We need to talk." Jordan opened the door, and Aunt Kay stepped in, her face serious. "I got a call today," she said. "From someone named Ethan Turner." Jordan's heart raced. "What did he say?" Aunt Kay sighed. "He said he's your father." Jordan felt like the ground was slipping out from under him. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Aunt Kay hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," she said, "it's true." Jordan's world shattered. The man he had been running from wasn't a stranger. He was his father. The room fell silent as Jordan processed Aunt Kay's words. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat louder than the last. He felt like the walls were closing in, like everything he thought he knew about his life had been a lie. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jordan's voice trembled, a mix of anger and hurt. Aunt Kay sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of the truth she had kept hidden for so long. "I wanted to protect you," she said. "Your mom. She didn't want Ethan in your life. She thought it was best if he didn't know about you." "But why?" Jordan demanded. "Why would she do that?" Aunt Kay sat down on the edge of the bed, her eyes filled with sadness. "Your mom was scared. Ethan's world was different from ours. He had money, power, and all the problems that come with it. She didn't think he'd want to be a father, and she didn't want you to grow up feeling unwanted." Jordan clenched his fists. "So she just decided for me." "She thought she was doing what was best," Aunt Kay said gently. "And after she passed, I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to bring up old wounds." Jordan turned away, his mind racing. His mother had made a decision that changed his life forever, and now, out of nowhere, this man, his father, wanted to be part of it. "I need to think," Jordan muttered, grabbing his backpack. "Jordan, wait." Aunt Kay started, but he was already out the door, his feet pounding down the hallway. Ethan sat in his car outside the apartment building, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He had been there for hours, waiting, hoping for a chance to talk to Jordan again. He felt a mix of anxiety and determination. He had spent years building an empire, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was the boy who had every reason to hate him. Finally, the building's door swung open, and Jordan stepped out. His eyes locked onto Ethan's car, and for a moment, they stared at each other. Then, without a word, Jordan turned and started walking down the street. Ethan hesitated, then got out of the car and followed. "Jordan," he called. Jordan stopped but didn't turn around. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice cold. "I just want to talk," Ethan said, keeping his distance. "Please, give me a chance to explain." Jordan sighed and turned to face him. "Explain what?" "That you didn't know I existed. That you're rich and famous, and I'm just some kid who doesn't matter." Ethan's heart ached at Jordan's words. "You matter," he said quietly. "More than you know." Jordan scoffed. "Yeah, right. You don't even know me." "I want to change that," Ethan said, "if you'll let me." Jordan studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Why now?" he asked. "Why do you care all of a sudden?" "Because I missed out on so much already," Ethan admitted, "and I don't want to miss out on any more." Jordan looked away, his emotions swirling. Part of him wanted to push Ethan away, to keep the walls around his heart intact, but another part of him, the part that had always wondered about his father, wanted to let him in. "Fine," Jordan said finally, "but don't think this means I trust you." Ethan nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I understand." They walked to a nearby diner, the kind of place where the waitresses knew everyone's name and the coffee flowed endlessly. They sat in a corner booth, the air between them tense. "So," Jordan said, breaking the silence, "what do you do? Besides following kids around and ruining their lives?" Ethan chuckled softly, appreciating Jordan's sharp wit. "I run a tech company," he said. "We build software and devices that help people connect." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "Like phones and stuff." "Something like that," Ethan said. "It's a big operation, but it wasn't always. I started with nothing and worked my way up." Jordan leaned back in his seat. "Must be nice having all that money." Ethan sighed. "Money makes some things easier, but it doesn't fix everything." Jordan rolled his eyes. "Yeah, okay. Tell that to someone who's been broke their whole life." Ethan didn't respond right away. He could see the resentment in Jordan's eyes, the bitterness that came from years of struggle. He wanted to bridge the gap between them, but he knew it wouldn't happen overnight. The waitress came by, setting down a plate of fries and 2 sodas. Jordan immediately dug in, his hunger overriding his anger for the moment. Ethan watched him, a mixture of pride and sadness filling his chest. "I know I can't change the past," Ethan said quietly, "but I wanted to hear from you now. Whatever you need, I'll do my best to provide." Jordan paused mid-bite, his eyes narrowing. "Why should I believe you?" Ethan met his gaze. "You don't have to," he said, "but I'm not going anywhere." Jordan didn't respond, but something in his expression softened. As they left the diner, the sky had turned a deep shade of purple, the city lights flickering to life. They'd walked in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the apartment building, Jordan stopped at the door. "You can't just show up here whenever you want," he said. "Aunt Kay's not going to like it." "I'll talk to her," Ethan said, "but only if you're okay with it." Jordan hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but don't expect her to roll out the welcome mat." Ethan smiled. "Noted." Jordan turned to go inside, but stopped. "Good night," he said quietly, then disappeared into the building. Ethan stood there for a moment, a sense of cautious optimism washing over him. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. But just as Ethan was about to get into his car, a black SUV screeched to a halt in front of the building. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, their faces grim. "Mr. Turner," one of them said, "we need to talk. It's about your son." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What's going on?" The man's expression was grave. "There's been a threat. We believe someone is targeting him." Ethan's heart pounded. "What kind of threat?" The man exchanged a look with his partner. "We can't discuss the details here. You need to come with us." Ethan's mind raced. Whoever was behind this wasn't just coming after him. They were coming after Jordan. "I'm not going anywhere without him," Ethan said firmly. The man nodded. "We'll make arrangements, but you need to move fast. Time is running out." Ethan looked up at the apartment building, his mind filled with a single thought. He had to protect Jordan, no matter what it took. Ethan burst through the apartment building's front door, his heart hammering in his chest. The elevator was too slow, so he took the stairs 2 at a time, racing up to the 3rd floor. The thought of danger closing in on Jordan pushed him faster, every second feeling like a lifetime. When he reached the apartment, he pounded on the door. "Jordan, Aunt Kay, open up." The door creaked open, and Aunt Kay stood there, her face a mix of confusion and concern. "Ethan, what's going on? Why are you yelling?" "Where's Jordan?" Ethan asked urgently, pushing past her into the apartment. Aunt Kay followed him, her voice rising. "He's in his room, but you need to tell me what this is about." Before Ethan could answer, Jordan appeared in the doorway of his room, rubbing his eyes. "What's with all the noise? You woke me up." Ethan exhaled in relief, but his sense of urgency didn't fade. "Jordan, we need to leave. Now?" Jordan frowned. "Leave? What are you talking about?" Ethan glanced back at Aunt Kay, then lowered his voice. "There's a threat against you. Some people might be trying to hurt you." Aunt Kay's face turned pale. What? Who would want to hurt him? I don't know yet, Ethan admitted, but I have security downstairs. They're going to take us somewhere safe. Jordan's eyes widened, his usual bravado replaced by fear. Is this because of you? He asked. Because you're rich? Maybe, Ethan said honestly. But right now, we don't have time to figure that out. We need to move. Aunt Kay grabbed her coat, her hands trembling. All right, let's go. Ethan led them down the stairs, his eyes constantly scanning for any sign of danger. When they reached the lobby, the two men from the SUV were waiting. Mr. Turner, one of them said, we have a safe house ready. We'll take you there now. Ethan nodded and ushered Jordan and Aunt Kay into the SUV. The ride was tense, the city lights flashing by as they sped through the streets. No one spoke, but the weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. The safe house was a sleek, modern townhouse in a quiet neighborhood. Inside, it was fully equipped with security systems and stocked with supplies. This will be your home for the time being, one of the men said. We'll have guards stationed outside around the clock. Ethan turned to Jordan and Aunt Kay. You'll be safe here, he assured them. Jordan crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. Safe from what? You still haven't told me who's after us. We don't have all the details yet, Ethan said, but I promise I'm going to find out. Jordan shook his head, his voice rising. This is insane. I didn't ask for any of this. Ethan stepped closer, his tone firm but gentle. I know, and I'm sorry. But right now, my only priority is keeping you safe. Jordan stared at him, his emotions swirling. He wanted to be angry, but he could see the genuine concern in Ethan's eyes. Reluctantly, he nodded. Fine, he muttered, but I'm not staying here forever. Ethan managed a small smile. Let's take it one day at a time. The first night in the safe house was quiet but tense. Jordan lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with questions. Who was after him? Why now? And how did his life spiral out of control so quickly? He thought about Ethan. Part of him still didn't trust him, but another part, a small growing part, wanted to believe that Ethan really cared. Across the hall, Ethan sat in the living room, going through files his security team had provided. He was determined to find out who was behind the threat. As he sifted through the information, a name caught his eye, Victor Barnes. Victor was a former business partner, someone Ethan had cut ties with years ago over a shady deal. Since then, Victor had made a name for himself in the underworld, dabbling in everything from illegal tech to organized crime. Ethan's jaw tightened. If Victor was involved, this was more dangerous than he had anticipated. He picked up his phone and dialed his investigator. I need you to dig deeper into Victor Barnes, he said. Find out if he's connected to this threat. The investigator promised to get back to him as soon as possible. Ethan hung up and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The next day, the atmosphere in the safe house was tense but calm. Jordan spent most of his time exploring the house, trying to keep his mind off the situation. Aunt Kay kept herself busy in the kitchen, while Ethan stayed glued to his laptop, coordinating with his team. But as evening fell, the tension returned. Ethan's phone buzzed with a new message from his investigator. Victor Barnes confirmed as the source of the threat. He knows about Jordan. Meeting requested. Ethan's stomach dropped. Victor knew about Jordan. That changed everything. He stood up and called for Jordan and Aunt Kay. We need to talk, he said, his voice serious. They gathered in the living room, their faces tense. I found out who is behind the threat, Ethan said. His name is Victor Barnes. He's someone I used to work with, but things went bad between us. Jordan frowned. Why would he care about me? Ethan hesitated, then said, because he knows you're my son, and he thinks he can use you to get to me. Aunt Kay gasped, and Jordan's eyes widened. So this is all because of you, Jordan said, his voice shaking with anger. I'm sorry, Ethan said. I never wanted this to happen, but now that it has, I'm going to do everything in my power to stop him. Jordan stood up, pacing the room. What does he want? Ethan sighed. Money, power, leverage. He wants to hurt me, and he thinks coming after you is the way to do it. Jordan stopped and looked at Ethan, his fear now mixed with determination. So, what do we do? Ethan's eyes hardened. We fight back. Just as the words left his mouth, the house's security alarm blared, and the lights flickered. Ethan's phone buzzed with an urgent message. Perimeter breach. Armed men approaching. Get down, Ethan shouted, pulling Jordan and Aunt Kay behind the couch. The sound of glass shattering filled the air, followed by heavy footsteps. The safe house was no longer safe. Ethan's mind raced as he planned their next move. They were outnumbered, but he wouldn't let anything happen to his family. "Stay low," he whispered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "I'll handle this." He grabbed a security panel on the wall and activated the house's defense system. Steel shutters slammed down over the windows, and an automated voice announced, "Security lockdown activated." But the intruders were already inside, and Ethan knew they wouldn't stop until they got what they came for. He glanced at Jordan, who was trembling but trying to stay brave. "We're going to get through this," Ethan said. "I promise." The door to the living room burst open, and the intruders stepped inside, their weapons raised. Ethan stood up slowly, his hands raised in surrender. "Take me," he said. "Just leave them alone." One of the men smirked. "Nice try, Turner, but we're not leaving without the boy." Ethan's heart pounded as he realized the full extent of the danger. This wasn't just about him anymore. Jordan was their target, and they would stop at nothing to get him. The room felt frozen in time. The intruders, clad in black and armed to the teeth, stood like statues, their weapons trained on Ethan. Jordan's heart pounded so loudly he was sure they could hear it. Aunt Kate clung to him, her breathing shallow. The lead intruder, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, took a step forward. "Here's how this is gonna work, Turner," he said, his voice cold. "You're gonna hand over the kid nice and easy. No one has to get hurt." Ethan's hands clenched at his sides, his mind racing. "You'll have to kill me first," he said evenly. Scarface chuckled. "That can be arranged," he said, gesturing to one of the men. Before anyone could react, there was a loud bang. Smoke filled the room, and a high-pitched alarm began to blare. The house's automated defense system had kicked into its next phase. Smoke and flash grenades to disorient intruders. "Move," Ethan shouted, grabbing Jordan and Aunt Kay. They scrambled toward the hidden panic room Ethan had been briefed about earlier. It was located behind a sliding bookshelf in the hallway. Ethan shoved the bookshelf aside, revealing a steel door. He punched in a code, and the door slid open with a hiss. "Inside now," he barked. Aunt Kate and Jordan rushed in, and Ethan followed, slamming the door shut behind them. The sound of gunfire and shouts echoed faintly through the reinforced walls. The panic room was small but secure, equipped with monitors showing live feeds from the house's security cameras. Ethan quickly locked down the system, activating a silent distress signal to his security team. Jordan slumped against the wall, his face pale. "Are they going to get in here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan knelt in front of him, his hands on Jordan's shoulders. "No," he said firmly. "This room is built to withstand anything. We're safe for now." Aunt Kay sat on the small bench, her hands shaking. "This is too much," she muttered. "I can't believe this is happening." Ethan stood and checked the monitors. The intruders were still in the house, searching room by room. Scarface seemed particularly agitated, barking orders at the others. "They're looking for us," Ethan said grimly, "but they won't find this room." Jordan hugged his knees to his chest. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "I didn't ask for any of this." Ethan felt a pang of guilt. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry, but I promise I'll get us out of this." Suddenly, one of the monitors flickered. A group of black SUVs pulled up outside, and armed security personnel poured out, moving with precision. Ethan's reinforcements had arrived. "Help's here," Ethan said, a hint of relief in his voice. The feed showed his team breaching the house, quickly overwhelming the intruders. Within minutes, the situation was under control. The remaining intruders were subdued and handcuffed, and Scarface was dragged outside, shouting threats. Ethan let out a long breath and turned to Jordan and Aunt Kay. "It's over," he said. An hour later, they sat in the living room of the now secured house. The security team had swept the entire property and ensured there were no further threats. Scarface and his crew had been taken into custody, but Ethan knew this was only the beginning. Victor Barnes was still out there, and he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. One of the security officers approached Ethan. "Mr. Turner, we've identified the leader of the intruders. He's not talking, but we've confirmed he works directly for Victor Barnes." Ethan nodded. "I figured as much. What's the plan now?" "We've increased security at all your properties," the officer said, "and we're coordinating with law enforcement to track down Barnes." "Good," Ethan said, "but I want Barnes found, whatever it takes." The officer nodded and left to make the necessary arrangements. Ethan turned back to Jordan and Aunt Kay. "You're both staying here under protection until this is resolved," he said. Aunt Kay nodded reluctantly. "I don't like it, but I understand." Jordan, however, was less willing. "I can't stay cooped up here forever," he said. "I have a life, you know." Ethan sighed. "I get it, Jordan. But right now, This is the safest place for you." Jordan crossed his arms. "Safe? You call this safe? People broke into our house with guns, and it's all because of you." Ethan felt the weight of Jordan's words. "You're right," he said. "This is my fault, but I'm going to fix it. I'll make sure Barnes can never hurt you again." Jordan stared at him, his expression a mix of anger and uncertainty. "You keep saying that," he said, "but how do I know you can actually do it?" Ethan met his gaze. "Because I'm your father," he said, "and I'll do whatever it takes to protect you." Later that night, as the house settled into an uneasy calm, Ethan sat alone in the study, his mind racing. He knew Barnes wouldn't stop until he had leverage over him, and Jordan was that leverage. Ethan's phone buzzed, and he picked it up. It was his private investigator. "I've had something," the investigator said. "Barnes is holed up in a warehouse on the south side. It's heavily guarded, but it's definitely him." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Send me the location," he said. "I'll handle it." The investigator hesitated. "Are you sure about this? It's risky." "I don't have a choice," Ethan said. He made this personal. He hung up and stared at the map the investigator sent. He knew going after Barnes was dangerous, but it was the only way to end this once and for all. Ethan stood and grabbed his jacket. He glanced at the photo of Jordan on the monitor, his resolve hardening. "It's time to finish this," he muttered, heading for the door. Ethan drove through the empty streets, his mind laser-focused on the task ahead. The warehouse was on the outskirts of the city, hidden away in an industrial area. It was the kind of place no one would think twice about, a perfect hiding spot for someone like Victor Barnes. As he neared the location, he parked a block away, opting to go the rest of the way on foot. The last thing he wanted was to announce his arrival. The building loomed in the distance, its metal frame casting shadows under the dim streetlights. He could see guards patrolling outside, their flashlights sweeping the area. Ethan's heart pounded, but he kept his breathing steady. He'd come this far, he wasn't turning back now. If this was the only way to ensure Jordan's safety, he'd face Barnes alone. He slipped around the back of the building, ducking behind crates and barrels to avoid being seen. The security was tight, but he spotted a small side door that seemed less guarded. He crouched down, waiting for the right moment. When the nearest guard turned his back, Ethan darted forward, pressing himself against the cold metal of the door. He tried the handle, locked. Reaching into his pocket, Ethan pulled out a slim tool, one of the few skills he'd picked up in his younger, wilder days. Within seconds, he heard the soft click, and the door eased open. He slipped inside, shutting it silently behind him. The warehouse was dimly lit, with rows of stacked crates creating a maze of narrow corridors. Voices echoed from somewhere in the back, and Ethan followed the sound, his footsteps soft on the concrete floor. As he moved deeper into the building, the voices grew louder. He could hear Barnes's unmistakable drawl, filled with arrogance and malice. Ethan peered around the corner, his eyes locking onto Barnes, who stood surrounded by his men. The man hadn't changed much since they'd parted ways, still smug, still ruthless. "You should have seen Turner's face when he realized his son was in danger," Barnes was saying, laughing with his men. "He's got the money, the power, but I know his weakness now. That kid of his, they'll do anything to protect him." Ethan clenched his fists, resisting the urge to step out right then and there. But he needed a plan. Charging in alone would be suicide. Instead, he pulled back, formulating his next move. He'd have to get to Barnes alone, separate him from his guards somehow. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on Ethan's shoulder, and he spun around, his fists up, ready to defend himself. But it wasn't one of Barnes's men. It was a member of his own security team. "Sir," the guard whispered, "we figured you'd come here. We're here to back you up." Ethan exhaled, his tension easing slightly. "How many are with you?" "5. We positioned ourselves around the exits. Just give us the signal." Ethan nodded, relief mingling with his determination. "Good. We need to get Barnes alone. If he has no way out, they'll talk." The guard gave a quick nod, slipping back into the shadows to relay the instructions. Ethan crept forward again, keeping his eyes fixed on Barnes and waiting for the right moment. Back at the safe house, Jordan lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had seen the look in Ethan's eyes before he'd left, the grim determination that hinted at a dangerous plan. Jordan knew enough from the streets to recognize when someone was about to do something reckless. He sat up, pulling his phone from his pocket. He was tempted to call Ethan, but he didn't know if he'd even answer. Instead, he dialed Aunt Kay's number, who was in the next room. She picked up after a few rings. "Jordan, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "Do you think he's coming back?" Jordan asked quietly. There was a pause before Aunt Kay replied. "I think your dad's doing everything he can to make sure we're safe. He'll be back, Jordan. He won't leave you." Jordan wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at him. He didn't trust easily, and Ethan's sudden appearance in his life had thrown everything into chaos. Part of him wanted to push Ethan away, but another part, the part that wanted a father, was terrified of losing him. "Okay," he said finally, "I'll see you in the morning." He hung up, lying back down and trying to ignore the sinking feeling in his stomach. Inside the warehouse, Ethan waited for the signal. He watched as Barnes's men slowly drifted away, leaving their boss standing alone near a desk cluttered with papers and a laptop. The guard reappeared, giving Ethan a quick nod. "We're in position," he whispered. Ethan took a deep breath, stepping out from his hiding spot and making his way toward Barnes. As he approached, Barnes looked up, a smirk spreading across his face. "Well, Barnes drawled. The great Ethan Turner, finally brave enough to face me." Ethan stopped a few feet away, his expression hard. "This ends now, Victor." Barnes laughed, clearly amused. "You think you can waltz in here and make demands? You might be rich, but here, you're just another man." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I came to tell you to leave my son out of this. Whatever problem you have is with me. He's just a kid." Barnes's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "A kid? That kid is the only reason you're vulnerable, Ethan. You built walls around yourself for years, untouchable. But now, I have leverage." Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. "If you go after him again, I swear you'll regret it." "Oh." Barnes raised an eyebrow. "And what are you going to do about it?" Before Ethan could answer, the sound of gunfire erupted from outside. His security team had engaged with Barnes's guards, and the warehouse filled with the echo of chaos. Barnes glanced toward the noise, his smug demeanor faltering for the first time. "Looks like your men aren't as loyal as you thought," Ethan said, using the distraction to close the distance between them. Barnes scowled, pulling a gun from his waistband and pointing it at Ethan. "This could have gone so differently, Turner, but you forced my hand." Ethan didn't flinch. He stared down the barrel, his mind racing as he calculated his next move. Just then, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse as one of his guards burst in, tackling Barnes and knocking the gun from his hand. Ethan quickly joined in, grabbing Barnes's arms and twisting them behind his back as his guard restrained him. Barnes struggled, but Ethan held firm, his anger giving him strength. "It's over, Victor," Ethan said, his voice filled with finality. "You're done." Barnes glared up at him, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "You think you've won," he spat. "This isn't the end. There are others, people who won't stop until they see you destroyed." Ethan didn't respond. He motioned for his guard to take Barnes away, watching as his old enemy was dragged out of the warehouse in handcuffs. As the last of Barnes's men were rounded up, Ethan finally allowed himself to exhale. The danger wasn't entirely gone. He knew Barnes had connections, people who might come after him or Jordan in the future. But for now, the immediate threat was neutralized. Ethan left the warehouse, his mind filled with one thought. He needed to get back to Jordan. He'd been gone long enough, and he didn't want his son spending another night wondering if he'd come back. Hours later, the sun was rising over the city as Ethan returned to the safe house. He unlocked the door quietly, stepping inside. Aunt Kay was in the kitchen, making coffee. She looked up, relief flooding her face. "You're back," she said softly, setting down her mug. Ethan nodded. "It's over. For now, at least." Aunt Kay gave him a weary smile. "Jordan's been worried sick. He didn't sleep much." Ethan's heart tightened. "I'll talk to him." He made his way to Jordan's room and knocked gently. After a moment, the door opened, and Jordan stood there, his face a mixture of relief and anger. "You came back," Jordan said, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan nodded. "I told you I would." Jordan stared at him, searching his face as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then, without a word, he stepped forward and hugged him tightly. Ethan was momentarily taken aback, but he wrapped his arms around Jordan, holding him close. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered, "for everything." Jordan pulled back, his eyes red. "Just don't leave again, okay?" Ethan nodded, a promise in his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere." As they stood there, father and son, Ethan knew this was just the beginning of their journey. The danger might not be entirely gone, but they would face it together. And for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be the father Jordan deserved. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. Ethan and Jordan sat at the kitchen table, an awkward silence between them. Aunt Kay moved around the kitchen, the clatter of dishes the only sound breaking the quiet. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. "Jordan," he began, his voice gentle but firm. "I know things have been moving fast, and I haven't given you much of a choice in any of this, but I want to be honest with you about what's going on." Jordan looked up from his bowl of cereal, his expression wary. "Honest? Like how you didn't tell me you were my dad until a couple of days ago." Ethan winced but nodded. "You're right. I kept my distance because I didn't know you existed. If I had known—" He trailed off, struggling to find the right words. "But now that I do, everything's changed, and I need you to understand what we're up against." Jordan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Okay, I'm listening." Ethan glanced at Aunt Kay, who gave him a small nod before sitting down beside Jordan. "The man who sent those guys after us, Victor Barnes, he's dangerous. He used to be a business partner of mine, but we had a falling out when I found out he was involved in illegal activities. He's been looking for a way to get back at me ever since. And on his way in," Jordan said, his voice bitter. Ethan's face softened. "It's not fair, and it's not right. But yes, he sees you as a weakness he can exploit. That's why I've been doing everything I can to protect you." Jordan stared at the table for a moment before meeting Ethan's gaze. "What happens now? Are we just supposed to stay locked up here forever?" "No," Ethan said. "Barnes has been taken into custody, but he's not the only threat. I've got people working to make sure his entire operation is shut down. It'll take time, but once it's done, you'll be safe." Jordan sighed. "Great, more waiting." Aunt Kay reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know it's hard, sweetheart, but we'll get through this. Together." Jordan nodded reluctantly, and the room fell into a tense silence once more. Later that afternoon, Ethan received a call from his private investigator. He stepped into the study, closing the door behind him. "What's the update?" he asked, his tone brisk. "Barnes isn't talking, but we've managed to intercept some communications from his network," the investigator said. "It seems like there's someone else pulling the strings, a financier who's been funding his operations." Ethan frowned. "Do we have a name?" "Not yet," the investigator admitted, "but we're getting close. Whoever this person is, they've got deep pockets and a lot of influence. They're the real power behind Barnes." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "Find them. I want this finished." "We're on it," the investigator assured him. "I'll keep you updated." Ethan ended the call and stared out the window, his mind racing. The revelation that someone else was behind Barnes added a new layer of danger to an already precarious situation. Whoever this financier was, they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. That evening, Jordan sat on the couch, flipping aimlessly through TV channels. Nothing held his interest. His thoughts kept drifting back to the events of the past few days. He felt like a pawn in a game he didn't understand, and it frustrated him. Ethan entered the room, holding a basketball under his arm. "Hey," he said, tossing the ball to Jordan. Jordan caught it, raising an eyebrow. "What's this for?" "I figured we could shoot some hoops," Ethan said. "There's a small court in the backyard." Jordan looked skeptical. "You play basketball?" Ethan chuckled. "Not since college, but I'm willing to embarrass myself if it means spending time with you." Jordan couldn't help but smile. "All right, let's see what you've got, old man." They headed outside, the cool evening air a welcome change from the tension inside. The backyard court was small but well-maintained, with a hoop at one end and plenty of space to move around. Ethan bounced the ball a few times before passing it to Jordan. "Let's play a quick game. First to 10 wins." Jordan grinned. "You're on." They started playing, and for the first time in days, the weight of their situation seemed to lift. Jordan moved with ease, dribbling past Ethan and sinking a clean shot. "Not bad," Ethan said, retrieving the ball. "But let's see how you handle this." He attempted a layup but missed, drawing a laugh from Jordan. "You call that a shot?" Ethan laughed too, shaking his head. "I'm rusty. Give me a break." As the game went on, their competitive sides emerged, each trying to outdo the other. But more than that, they were connecting in a way they hadn't before. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about building a bond. After a particularly impressive shot from Jordan, Ethan held up his hands in surrender. "All right, you win," he said, panting. "You got skills." Jordan beamed. "Told you." They sat on the edge of the court, catching their breath. The sky above them was a deep shade of blue, the first stars beginning to appear. "I had fun," Jordan admitted, dribbling the ball idly. "Me too," Ethan said. "We should do this more often." Jordan nodded, and for a moment, there was a comfortable silence between them. But then his expression grew serious. Do you think Barnes is really gone? Ethan hesitated. For now, but there's someone else we need to worry about. Someone more dangerous. Jordan frowned. Great. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll get through this, I promise. Later that night, as the house settled into a quiet calm, Ethan's phone buzzed with a new message from his investigator. We got a name. The financier is someone you know, Arthur Langston. Ethan stared at the message, his blood running cold. Arthur Langston was a prominent figure in the business world, a man Ethan had crossed paths with many times. He was known for his charm and philanthropy, but behind the scenes, he was ruthless. Ethan knew that if Langston was involved, the danger was far from over. Just then, a faint sound caught his attention. He stepped out of the study and found Jordan standing in the hallway, looking uneasy. What's wrong? Ethan asked. I heard something, Jordan said quietly. Outside. Ethan's heart quickened. He grabbed the nearest weapon, a metal bat, and motioned for Jordan to stay behind him. They moved cautiously toward the front door, where the sound of footsteps could be heard just beyond the porch. Ethan glanced through the peephole and saw a figure standing in the shadows. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing by. They were waiting. Ethan tightened his grip on the bat and slowly unlocked the door, ready for whatever, or whoever, was on the other side. He opened it, and the figure stepped into the light, revealing a face Ethan never expected to see again. Hello, Ethan, the man said, his voice smooth and familiar. We need to talk. Ethan's grip on the bat loosened as shock washed over him. Arthur, he said, what are you doing here? Arthur Langston smiled, but there was no warmth in his eyes. You didn't think I'd let you ruin my plans without a fight, did you? Ethan didn't move, his mind racing as he stared at Arthur Langston. The man stood calmly on the porch, his hands in his pockets, as if this were a casual visit. But Ethan knew better. Langston's presence was a threat in itself, a message that the fight was far from over. You've had guts showing up here, Ethan said, his voice low and tense, especially after what your men tried to pull. Langston chuckled softly. If you're referring to Barnes and his crew, they were a blunt instrument. I prefer a more personal approach. Ethan tightened his grip on the bat. Why are you here, Arthur? Langston's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold determination. I came to offer you a deal, he said. You back off, let my operations run smoothly, and in return, I'll leave your son out of this. Ethan's jaw clenched. You expect me to let you continue your illegal schemes? You've got another thing coming. Langston raised an eyebrow. Think carefully, Ethan. You may be wealthy, but you're not untouchable. I have resources, connections. If you keep pushing, you'll put everyone you care about at risk. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes blazing. If you think threatening my family will make me back down, you don't know me at all. Langston sighed, as if disappointed. I was hoping you'd see reason, but if you want to play the hero, so be it. Just remember, you've been warned. He turned to leave, but Ethan called after him. This isn't over, Arthur. I'll see to it that you're brought down. Langston glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. We'll see about that. As he disappeared into the shadows, Ethan closed the door and turned to find Jordan standing nearby, his face pale. Who was that? Jordan asked, his voice trembling. Ethan hesitated. His name is Arthur Langston. He's the one behind all of this. Jordan swallowed hard. He knows where we are. He won't make a move right now, Ethan said, trying to reassure him. But we need to stay on guard. He's dangerous. Jordan nodded, though fear still lingered in his eyes. What are we going to do? Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. We fight back, smarter this time. But first, I need to make some calls. Ethan retreated to the study and immediately dialed his investigator. The line barely rang before the man picked up. Langston just showed up at the safe house, Ethan said without preamble. He made it clear he's not backing down. There was a pause on the other end. That's bold, the investigator said. He's either trying to intimidate you or he's desperate. Maybe both, Ethan muttered. I need everything you've got on him. Every dirty deal, every connection. If we're going to take him down, we need leverage. Understood. I'll have a full report by morning. Ethan hung up and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Langston was playing a dangerous game, and he had the resources to make life hell for anyone who crossed him. But Ethan wasn't about to let him win. The next morning, Ethan gathered Jordan and Aunt Kay in the living room. The atmosphere was heavy, the tension palpable. We're not just sitting ducks, Ethan began, his tone firm. I've got a plan to take Langston down, but it's going to take time. In the meantime, we stay alert. No one leaves the house without security. Aunt Kay nodded, though her face was lined with worry. Do you really think you can stop him? I have to, Ethan said, for Jordan's sake. Jordan looked up, his expression a mix of fear and defiance. I want to help, he said. Ethan shook his head. Your job is to stay safe. Let me handle this. Jordan's fists clenched. I'm not a kid, Ethan. I've been taking care of myself for years. I can handle this. Ethan knelt in front of him, his voice softening. I know you're strong, Jordan, but right now the best way you can help is by staying out of harm's way. Trust me, okay. Jordan hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Okay. Later that evening, Ethan received the report from his investigator. The file was thick, filled with evidence of Langston's illegal activities, money laundering, blackmail, and connections to organized crime. It was enough to bring him down, but it needed to be handled carefully. Ethan called a meeting with his legal team and a trusted contact in law enforcement. They agreed to start building a case against Langston, but it would require airtight evidence and the cooperation of several witnesses. As they worked late into the night, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. Langston might have power and connections, but he wasn't invincible. Meanwhile, Jordan couldn't sleep. He paced his room, his mind racing with thoughts of Langston and the danger they were in. He hated feeling helpless, like a pawn in someone else's game. Finally, he grabbed his phone and did something he hadn't done in a long time. He called Malik, one of the older boys he used to hang out with. Yo, Jordan, Malik answered, his voice surprised. Haven't heard from you in a minute. What's up? I need your help, Jordan said, keeping his voice low. Malik laughed. You in trouble or something? Something like that, Jordan admitted. I just need to know if you've heard of a guy named Arthur Langston. There was a pause on the other end. Langston? Yeah, I've heard of him. Big-time player. Why you asking? Jordan hesitated. He's after my family. I need to know everything you can find out about him. Malik whistled. That's serious. All right, I'll see what I can dig up. But you owe me, little man. Thanks, Jordan said, hanging up. He knew Ethan wouldn't approve, but he couldn't just sit around waiting. If there was a way to help, he was going to find it. The next day, Ethan was reviewing the latest updates when Jordan approached him, his expression determined. I want to talk to you about Langston, Jordan said. Ethan frowned. What about him? I did some digging, Jordan admitted. I know you said to stay out of it, but I couldn't just sit here doing nothing. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What kind of digging? Jordan hesitated, then told him about the call to Malik. He's going to help us find out more about Langston's connections, he said. Ethan's initial frustration melted into reluctant admiration. Jordan's resourcefulness reminded him of himself at that age. All right, Ethan said. But from now on, we do this together. No more going behind my back. Jordan nodded. Deal. As father and son exchanged a determined look, the bond between them grew stronger. They were in this fight together, and neither of them would back down. But as they prepared for the next phase, neither of them knew just how far Langston was willing to go, or how high the stakes would rise. Ethan spent the next few days meticulously building his case against Langston. His legal team worked tirelessly, piecing together evidence that could dismantle Langston's empire. Meanwhile, his private investigator and Jordan's friend Malik provided a steady stream of information about Langston's operations. Each new detail painted a clearer picture of a man who thrived in the shadows, manipulating events from behind the scenes. Despite the progress, the tension in the safe house was palpable. The security presence remained constant, and everyone was on edge, knowing Langston wouldn't go down without a fight. One evening, Ethan gathered Jordan and Aunt Kay in the living room. We're getting close, he said. Langston's network is unraveling, but he's not going to sit back and let it happen. We need to be prepared for anything. Aunt Kay nodded, her face lined with worry. What does that mean for us? It means heightened security, Ethan replied, but it also means we have to stay vigilant. Langston's next move could come at any time. Jordan, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. What happens when we take him down? Will this all be over? Ethan hesitated. Taking down Langston will eliminate the immediate threat, but we'll need to stay cautious. His allies might still come after us. Jordan nodded slowly. Then we finish this together. Ethan gave him a small, proud smile. Together. The next morning, Malik sent Jordan a message. Got something big. Langston's meeting with someone tonight at the old pier. Thought you want to know. Jordan showed the message to Ethan, who immediately sprang into action. This could be our chance to catch him in the act, Ethan said. If we can get evidence of him making a deal, it'll strengthen our case. Ethan contacted his investigator and security team, arranging to have the pier under surveillance. By evening, they were ready to move. The pier was a desolate place at night, the wooden planks creaking underfoot as waves lapped against the posts. Ethan, accompanied by a small team, watched from a hidden vantage point as Langston arrived, flanked by 2 bodyguards. Moments later, another car pulled up, and a man stepped out, his face obscured by the low light. Ethan's investigators snapped photos and recorded the scene, capturing every detail. Langston and the man exchanged briefcases, their conversation inaudible over the sound of the wind and waves. But then, something unexpected happened. One of Langston's bodyguards glanced around and seemed to spot something in the distance. He pulled out his gun and shouted, "We've got company." The quiet surveillance mission quickly spiraled into chaos. Langston's men began searching the area, their flashlights sweeping across the pier. Ethan's team tried to stay hidden, but it was clear their cover was blown. Ethan motioned for them to retreat, but before they could move, a shot rang out. "Get down," Ethan shouted, pulling his investigator behind a stack of crates. The pier erupted into a firefight, bullets flying as Langston's men clashed with Ethan's security team. Ethan's heart pounded as he tried to keep track of the action, his primary concern being the safety of his team. Through the chaos, Ethan caught a glimpse of Langston retreating toward his car. "He's getting away," Ethan shouted. Without thinking, Ethan sprinted after him, weaving through the gunfire. He reached Langston just as he was about to climb into the car. "Langston," Ethan yelled, grabbing his arm and pulling him back. Langston turned, his face a mask of fury. "You just don't know when to quit, did you?" "I'm not letting you walk away from this," Ethan growled. Langston sneered. "You're too late, Turner. The deal's done. You'll never stop me." Before Ethan could respond, Langston shoved him hard, causing him to stumble. Langston used the moment to jump into the car, slamming the door as it sped off into the night. Ethan cursed under his breath, watching the car disappear. But as he turned back toward the pier, he saw his investigator holding up the recording device. "We got everything," the investigator said, a grim smile on his face. Ethan nodded, the weight of the moment sinking in. Langston had escaped, but they had what they needed to bring him down. Back at the safe house, Jordan paced nervously, waiting for Ethan's return. When the front door finally opened and Ethan stepped inside, Jordan rushed over. "Are you okay?" Jordan asked, his eyes wide with concern. "I'm fine," Ethan said, placing a reassuring hand on Jordan's shoulder. "It got messy, but we got the evidence we needed." Jordan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "So it's over?" "Not yet," Ethan said, "but we've had a solid case now. Langston's days are numbered." Aunt Kate joined them, relief evident on her face. "I'm glad you're safe," she said softly. Ethan nodded, but his mind was already on the next steps. They had Langston cornered, but the fight wasn't over. He knew the man would retaliate in some way, and they needed to be ready. That night, as the house settled into an uneasy quiet, Ethan sat in his study, reviewing the evidence. The recordings, the photos, and the documents they had collected formed a damning case against Langston. But as he stared at the screen, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but you've only made things worse. Watch your back." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. Langston wasn't going down without a fight, and the message was a clear warning. He looked up, his jaw set with determination. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about protecting Jordan and Aunt Kay, about ensuring their safety no matter the cost. Ethan knew the battle was far from over, but he was ready for whatever came next. The atmosphere in the safe house had shifted. The successful gathering of evidence should have been a moment of triumph, but Langston's ominous message weighed heavily on everyone. Each creak of the house, each shadow that moved past a window, felt like a potential threat. Ethan spent the next morning in his study, coordinating with his legal team and law enforcement contacts. His investigator confirmed that the evidence had been securely delivered to the authorities. It was only a matter of time before Langston would be formally charged. But Ethan knew Langston well enough to realize that he wouldn't wait quietly for his downfall. Later that afternoon, Jordan sat at the kitchen table, texting Malik for updates. Malik's network of contacts had been invaluable, providing street-level intelligence that filled in the gaps left by official channels. "Jordan, any new info?" "Malik, Langston's moving some of his assets. Looks like he's gearing up for something big. Be careful, man." Jordan frowned, rereading the message. He had a sinking feeling Langston wasn't just trying to protect his wealth. He was preparing for an all-out retaliation. "Everything okay?" Aunt Kay asked, noticing the worried look on his face. Jordan hesitated before showing her the message. "Malik thinks Langston's planning something." Aunt Kay's face paled. "Did you tell your father?" Jordan shook his head. "Not yet, but I will." Aunt Kay nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she resumed her task of folding laundry. "I just want this nightmare to end," she said softly. Ethan was reviewing security footage when Jordan entered the study. Without a word, Jordan handed him his phone, showing Malik's latest message. Ethan's expression darkened as he read it. "This aligns with what my investigator's been hearing," he said. "Langston's trying to cover his tracks and likely planning a counterattack." Jordan crossed his arms. "So what do we do?" "We stay one step ahead," Ethan said. "I've already increased security around the house, and I've got a plan to make sure Langston can't slip away." Jordan looked skeptical. "What kind of plan?" Ethan leaned forward, his eyes serious. "We're going to force his hand. We've got enough evidence to get a warrant for his arrest, but we need him in custody before he can disappear or retaliate." Jordan frowned. "And what if he comes after us first?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's why we're not waiting for him to make the next move." That evening, the safe house was eerily quiet. Ethan's security team was on high alert, their presence more visible than before. Jordan paced his room, unable to shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Around midnight, his fears were realized. The house's security alarm blared, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Jordan bolted upright, his heart racing. He could hear the muffled voices of the security team outside, shouting commands and engaging with an unseen enemy. Ethan burst into Jordan's room moments later. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice firm. "Lock the door and don't open it for anyone but me." "But," Jordan started. "No arguments," Ethan said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "I'll come back for you." Ethan rushed out, leaving Jordan alone with the sound of his pounding heart and the chaos unfolding outside. Ethan moved swiftly through the house, his mind laser-focused. He met with his lead security officer near the front entrance. "What's the situation?" Ethan demanded. "Multiple hostiles," the officer reported. "They're heavily armed, but we've got them pinned down near the perimeter." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. This wasn't a simple scare tactic. Langston had sent a full assault team. Ethan grabbed a communication device and barked orders to his team, coordinating their defense. He knew they couldn't hold off this kind of attack indefinitely. They needed to end it quickly and decisively. In his room, Jordan sat on the edge of his bed, clutching his phone. He could hear the distant gunfire and shouts outside. Despite Ethan's warning, he couldn't just sit there, feeling helpless. He opened his phone and dialed Malik. "Jordan, what's going on?" Malik asked, his voice tinged with concern. "The safe house is under attack," Jordan said quickly. "I think it's Langston's men." Malik cursed under his breath. "I told you he was planning something. Do you need me to call for help?" "No," Jordan said. "My dad's got security here. Just stay on standby in case we need backup." "You got it," Malik said. "Stay safe, man." Jordan hung up and took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. Downstairs, Ethan's team was gaining the upper hand. Several of Langston's men had been subdued, and the remaining attackers were retreating. But just as things seemed to be under control, a loud explosion rocked the house. Ethan stumbled, bracing himself against the wall as the blast echoed through the halls. "What was that?" he shouted into his comms. "Explosives on the east side," a guard replied. "They're trying to blow their way in." Ethan cursed under his breath. Langston's men were more desperate, and more dangerous, than he'd anticipated. He knew they couldn't afford another breach. Grabbing a tactical vest from a nearby storage closet, Ethan armed himself and made his way toward the east wing. He wasn't going to let Langston's men tear his family apart. In his room, Jordan felt the floor shake from the explosion. The noise was deafening, and his instincts screamed at him to move. He unlocked his door and cautiously stepped into the hallway. "Jordan," Aunt Kay hissed from her room. "What are you doing? Get back inside." "I can't just hide," Jordan said. "I need to help." Before Aunt Kay could respond, another explosion rocked the house, this time closer. Jordan's eyes widened as smoke began to fill the hallway. "We have to get out of here," Aunt Kay said, grabbing his arm. Jordan nodded, helping her navigate through the thickening smoke. They made their way toward the panic room Ethan had shown them before, hoping it would offer some protection. Meanwhile, Ethan reached the east wing, where his security team was engaged in a fierce firefight. Langston's men had breached part of the house, their assault relentless. Ethan joined the fight, taking cover behind a doorway and firing at the intruders. His focus was razor-sharp, every movement calculated. He knew this battle would determine whether they could protect Jordan and Aunt Kay or lose everything. Suddenly, one of the attackers broke through the defensive line and rushed toward Ethan, a knife glinting in his hand. Ethan reacted instantly, disarming the man and knocking him unconscious. As he stood over the fallen attacker, Ethan's comm crackled to life. "Sir, the attackers are retreating," his lead officer reported. "We've got them on the run." Ethan exhaled, his muscles tense but his mind relieved. They had won this round, but he knew it wasn't the end. Once the house was secured, Ethan found Jordan and Aunt Kay huddled in the panic room. He pulled them into a tight embrace, relief washing over him. "It's over," Ethan said. "For now." Jordan looked up at him, his face serious. "Langston's not going to stop, is he?" Ethan shook his head. "No, but we're going to make sure he doesn't get another chance." As the family regrouped, Ethan's resolve hardened. Langston had pushed them to the brink, but Ethan was determined to finish this once and for all. The aftermath of the attack left the safe house in a state of disarray. Broken glass littered the floors, walls were scorched from the blasts, and the air still smelled of smoke. Despite the physical damage, Ethan's focus was unwavering. His family was safe, and Langston's men had been pushed back, but it wasn't enough. Langston had made this personal, and Ethan was ready to put an end to it. Early the next morning, Ethan gathered everyone in the living room. His security team stood nearby, their expressions grim. "Last night was a wake-up call," Ethan began. "Langston isn't going to stop until he's either in control or behind bars. We've heard him, but now he's desperate. That makes him more dangerous." Aunt Kay, still shaken, spoke up. "We can't keep living like this, Ethan. What's the plan?" Ethan held up a folder containing the evidence they'd collected. "We have enough to bring him down. I've already sent copies of this to law enforcement, but we're going to take it a step further." Jordan, sitting on the edge of the couch, leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "We're going public," Ethan said. "Langston thrives on secrecy. If we expose him, it'll cut off his resources and make it impossible for him to operate." Aunt Kay looked skeptical. "Won't that make him come after us even harder?" "Maybe," Ethan admitted. "But if we don't act now, they'll keep coming at us regardless. This is the only way to stop him." Jordan nodded slowly. "I'm in." Ethan smiled faintly, proud of his son's courage. "Good. I've already arranged for a press conference. We'll present the evidence and make sure the world knows who Langston really is." The press conference was set for the next day at a secure location. The media had been informed, and the story was already generating buzz. By the time Ethan, Jordan, and Aunt Kay arrived, the venue was swarming with reporters. Ethan stepped onto the stage, flanked by his legal team and security personnel. Jordan and Aunt Kay watched from the wings, their presence a reminder of what was at stake. Ethan adjusted the microphone, his gaze steady as he faced the cameras. "Good morning. My name is Ethan Turner, and I'm here to expose the criminal activities of a man who has operated in the shadows for too long, Arthur Langston." The room erupted in murmurs as Ethan laid out the evidence, detailing Langston's involvement in money laundering, blackmail, and orchestrating attacks on his own family. Each revelation was met with gasps and frantic note-taking from the reporters. As Ethan spoke, Jordan felt a mix of pride and anxiety. His father was taking a stand, but the danger loomed larger than ever. Across town, Langston watched the press conference from a lavish office. His expression was unreadable, but his clenched fists betrayed his anger. One of his associates entered the room. "Turner's got the world's attention now," the man said. "What do we do?" Langston stood slowly, his eyes cold. "Let him have his moment. It won't last." The associate hesitated. "Do you want us to make a move?" Langston smirked. "Not yet, but we'll remind Turner that he's playing a dangerous game." After the press conference, Ethan and his family returned to a new safe house. Their security detail doubled. The media frenzy was in full swing, with Langston's name plastered across every news outlet. For the first time, the tide seemed to be turning in their favor. That night, as they settled into their temporary home, Ethan sat with Jordan in the living room. "You did good today," Ethan said, his voice filled with pride. Jordan shrugged. "I didn't do much." "You stood by me," Ethan said. "That means more than you know." Jordan smiled faintly but quickly grew serious. "Do you think Langston will come after us again?" Ethan hesitated. "I'd be lying if I said no, but we're ready for him." As they spoke, a knock at the door sent a jolt of tension through the room. Ethan signaled to his security team, who quickly moved to check the entrance. Moments later, one of the guards returned, his face tense. "Sir, you're going to want to see this." Ethan and Jordan exchanged a glance before following the guard to the front door. There, a small package sat on the doorstep, wrapped in plain brown paper. Ethan's instincts screamed danger. "Get the bomb squad," he ordered. The guard nodded, carefully retrieving the package and taking it to a secure area. Within minutes, the bomb squad arrived and began their examination. Ethan, Jordan, and Aunt Kay waited anxiously as the team worked. Finally, the lead technician approached. "It's not a bomb," he said, "but you're not going to like what's inside." He handed Ethan a sealed evidence bag containing the package's contents, a single photograph of Jordan, taken from outside the safe house, with the words "I'm watching" scrawled across it in red ink. Jordan's face went pale. He knows where we are. Ethan's fists clenched. This ends now. Ethan immediately called his investigator and law enforcement contacts. "Langston's escalated," he said. "We need to move on him tonight." His investigator's voice was steady. "We've got his location. He's holed up in a private estate outside the city. It's heavily guarded, but we can take it." "Do it," Ethan said. "I'm coming with you." As the night deepened, Ethan, accompanied by a tactical team, prepared for the raid on Langston's estate. The plan was simple: get in, apprehend Langston, and put an end to his reign of terror. Jordan wanted to come, but Ethan insisted he stay behind. "This is something I have to do," Ethan said. "For you. For us." Jordan nodded reluctantly, his eyes filled with both fear and admiration. "Be careful." "I will," Ethan promised. The raid began just after midnight. The tactical team breached the estate's perimeter, quickly neutralizing Langston's guards. The sound of gunfire echoed through the night as Ethan moved with precision, his focus on finding Langston. Finally, he reached the main office. Bursting through the door, he found Langston sitting calmly behind a desk, a smug smile on his face. "Ethan," Langston said, spreading his arms, "I've been expecting you." "It's over, Langston," Ethan said, leveling his gun. "You're finished." Langston chuckled. "You've always been dramatic, but you should know by now, I don't go down easily." Before Ethan could respond, Langston pressed a hidden button under the desk. Alarms blared, and steel shutters began to close over the windows and doors. Ethan knew he had only seconds to act. He lunged forward, grabbing Langston and pulling him away from the desk just as the shutters sealed them inside. Langston struggled, but Ethan held firm. "This is where it ends," Ethan said, his voice cold. Langston smirked, even as his breathing grew labored. "You think you've won? You're just another pawn in a game you'll never understand." Ethan didn't flinch. "Maybe, but at least I'm protecting my family." The sound of pounding on the steel shutters signaled that the tactical team was working to breach the room. Ethan tightened his grip on Langston, ready for whatever came next. The pounding on the steel shutters grew louder, each bang echoing in the confined space. Ethan held Langston firmly, his eyes locked onto the man who had orchestrated so much chaos in their lives. Langston's smug expression remained, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. "You think they're going to save you?" Langston said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Even if they do, you'll never truly be safe. There's always another player waiting in the wings." Ethan tightened his grip. "You're dumb, Langston. The only place you're going is prison." Langston chuckled, his confidence returning. "Prison?" He shook his head. "You really think the system can hold someone like me? I've got people in every corner of this country. Even if you take me down, they'll keep coming." Ethan's jaw clenched, but he kept his composure. "Then I'll deal with them too." Before Langston could respond, the steel shutters gave way with a deafening crash. The tactical team stormed in, their weapons trained on Langston. The leader of the team nodded to Ethan. "We got him, Mr. Turner," the officer said. Ethan released Langston, who immediately raised his hands in mock surrender. "Gentlemen," Langston said smoothly, "no need for the theatrics. I'll come quietly." As the officers cuffed Langston and began to lead him out, he glanced back at Ethan. "This isn't the end, Turner. Not by a long shot." Ethan didn't respond, his expression steely as Langston was escorted out of the room. The weight of the moment settled over him. One battle won, but the war far from over. By the time Ethan returned to the safe house, it was nearly dawn. The house was quiet, the tension from earlier still lingering in the air. He found Jordan and Aunt Kay in the living room, waiting anxiously. Jordan stood as soon as he saw Ethan. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice filled with hope and fear. Ethan nodded, a tired but determined look in his eyes. "Langston's in custody. He won't be able to hurt us anymore." Aunt Kay let out a sigh of relief, sinking into the couch. "Thank God." Jordan, however, wasn't entirely convinced. What about his people? Malik said Langston's got a whole network. Ethan sat down beside him. We've dismantled a lot of it, and with Langston out of the picture, the rest will start to fall apart. But we'll stay vigilant. We're not taking any chances. Jordan nodded slowly, his shoulders relaxing slightly. I just want things to go back to normal. Ethan placed a hand on his son's shoulder. They will. It'll take time, but we'll get there. The next few days were a blur of interviews, legal proceedings, and debriefings. Langston's arrest was front-page news, and the public response was overwhelming. Ethan's decision to go public had not only exposed Langston but also shone a light on the larger network of corruption he had built. Despite the media frenzy, Ethan kept his focus on his family. He worked closely with law enforcement to ensure their safety, knowing that Langston's associates might still pose a threat. But with each passing day, the dangers seemed to recede, and a sense of normalcy began to return. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Ethan and Jordan stood on the balcony of their new home. The safe house had served its purpose, but Ethan wanted them to have a place they could truly call their own, a fresh start. Jordan leaned on the railing, watching the city lights flicker to life. It feels weird, he said after a moment. Like everything's changed, but it's still the same. Ethan nodded, understanding what his son meant. We've been through a lot, he said, but we've come out stronger. Jordan glanced at him. Do you think Langston will ever try to come after us again? Ethan's gaze hardened. If he does, we'll be ready. But for now, we focus on moving forward. Jordan smiled faintly. Yeah, moving forward sounds good. They stood in silence for a while, the weight of the past weeks slowly lifting. For the first time in what felt like forever, the future seemed bright. Just as they were about to head back inside, Ethan's phone buzzed with a new message. He frowned, pulling it out of his pocket. The message was from an unknown number. You won this round, but the game isn't over. Sleep with one eye open. Ethan's stomach tightened. He showed the message to Jordan, who read it silently, his expression hardening. Do you think it's from Langston? Jordan asked. Could be, Ethan said, or one of his allies. Jordan's eyes narrowed. What do we do? Ethan placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his resolve unshaken. We keep living our lives. We don't let them control us. Jordan nodded, determination in his eyes. Together. Ethan smiled. Together. As they walked back inside, Ethan knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But he also knew they were stronger now, united as a family, ready to face whatever challenges came their way. The message lingered in Ethan's mind long after he and Jordan had gone inside. The threat was clear, even with Langston behind bars. His influence extended beyond prison walls. It was a sobering reminder that the fight wasn't entirely over. But Ethan had faced worse odds before, and he wasn't about to let fear dictate their lives. The next morning, Ethan met with his legal team and a high-ranking law enforcement officer in their new home's secure office. They analyzed the message and its implications. This could be a bluff, the officer said, adjusting his glasses. Langston trying to rattle you from behind bars. Or, Ethan countered, it's his way of letting me know he still has people on the outside. The officer nodded grimly. Either way, we'll increase surveillance on your family and monitor Langston's known associates. If they make a move, we'll be ready. Ethan leaned back in his chair. And what about Langston's trial? How soon can we get him in front of a judge? The case is solid, Ethan's lead attorney said. With the evidence you provided, we can expect a swift trial. But Langston's got high-priced lawyers. They'll delay as much as they can. Ethan exhaled slowly. Let them try. The longer this drags out, the more we expose. While Ethan worked tirelessly with his legal team, Jordan tried to settle into his new routine. He started attending a private school under a new identity, something Ethan insisted on for his safety. At first, Jordan struggled with the changes, but over time, he began to adjust. One day after school, Jordan walked into the house to find Ethan waiting in the living room. Hey, Dad, he said, dropping his backpack. What's up? Ethan smiled. I thought we could shoot some hoops, like old times. Jordan's eyes lit up. You sure you're ready to get school again? Ethan laughed. Let's see if you've still got it. They headed to the backyard, where a basketball hoop had been set up. As they played, their laughter echoed across the yard. For a while, it felt like the danger and tension of the past few weeks had melted away. But even in moments of levity, Ethan remained vigilant. His security team was always nearby, and every precaution was in place. He knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down completely. Weeks passed, and Langston's trial date was finally set. The media frenzy reached a new peak, with reporters camped outside the courthouse. Ethan prepared to testify, knowing his testimony would be crucial in securing Langston's conviction. On the morning of the trial, Ethan stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. Jordan appeared in the doorway, looking nervous. "Are you ready?" Jordan asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Ethan said, turning to face his son. "This is the last step, Jordan. After today, Langston won't be able to hurt anyone again." Jordan nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "What if he gets away with it?" "He won't," Ethan said firmly. "We've got the truth on our side." The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal teams, and spectators. Langston sat at the defense table, his expression calm, his expensive suit meticulously tailored. But Ethan could see the faint tension in his posture. Ethan took the stand, his voice steady as he recounted everything: the threats, the attacks, the evidence of Langston's criminal empire. The prosecution played the recordings and showed the photographs, painting a damning picture of Langston's activities. Langston's defense team tried to discredit Ethan, but their arguments fell flat. The evidence was overwhelming. As the trial progressed, it became clear that Langston's influence was waning. His former allies began to distance themselves, and several even agreed to testify against him in exchange for leniency. Finally, after weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and stunned silence. Langston's composure cracked for the first time, his face contorting in rage as the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. It was over. Outside the courthouse, Ethan addressed the press. "Today's verdict is a victory for justice, but it's also a reminder of the importance of standing up against those who abuse their power. My family and I can finally begin to heal, and we're grateful for the support we've received throughout this journey." As he stepped away from the podium, Jordan and Aunt Kay joined him. Together, they walked to their car, ready to leave the chaos behind. Back at home, the family celebrated quietly. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be without challenges, but for the first time in months, they felt a sense of peace. Later that night, Ethan and Jordan sat on the balcony, looking out at the city skyline. "I'm proud of you," Ethan said. "You've been through so much, and you've handled it with strength and courage." Jordan smiled. "I had a good role model." Ethan placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "We've got a new chapter ahead of us. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Jordan nodded. Together. As the stars shimmered above, father and son sat in silence, knowing that while their journey had been marked by hardship, it had also brought them closer than ever. For the first time in a long time, the future felt bright.